Meeting will come to order. In the spirit of having our military here, we're going to get started on time. So we appreciate you all being here very, very much. Subcommittee will come to order. Today we're meeting to discuss the President's fiscal year 2019 budget request for military construction, family housing, and base realignment and closure for the Department of Defense. The fiscal year 2019 budget request of $10.5 billion reflects a slight increase over the 2018 enacted level of $10.1 billion. MILCON delivers facility investments that contribute to current and future force readiness, whether they support the next generation of weapon systems, provide support to the combatant commanders, or strengthen partnerships with our allies. Facility investments improve the quality of life for our soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines, not only with mission-critical facilities, but with improvements in family housing, schools, health care, and a variety of support facilities. While the fiscal year 2019 MILCON request is an improvement over the historically low request from prior years, this request remains relatively flat compared to fiscal year 2018. The MILCON portfolio has been taking on increasing levels of risk for years as limited resources have been put towards higher priority readiness issues. Critical recapitalization projects have been displaced as an already constrained budget is squeezed even further to accommodate new platforms and weapons systems. Compounded with a long list of deferred recapitalization, the increased complexity of facilities needed to support today's weapon systems are putting further strain on the budget. Buildings today are more complex in design and function than traditional construction projects, resulting in higher cost and critical construction schedules as new platforms and weapon systems are interdependent with their new facilities. There are more projects that exceed $100 million in the fiscal year 2019 budget than the past four budget requests combined. As cost of construction projects continue to rise, affordability decreases as large and complex projects take up greater share of the budget. In light of the environment just described, it is disappointing the infrastructure did not receive any increases from the recent budget cap agreement. It's also frustrating that half of the department decided not to submit an unfunded priority list when all of the services have acknowledged a substantial backlog of MILCON requirements. Increases in the fiscal year 2019 budget request begin to improve our infrastructure, but reversing years of underfunding while simultaneously building ready and resilient installations to support changing global posture will remain a challenge. We must work smarter and find innovative solutions to bring the right investment at the right time, on schedule and within budget, to deliver facilities that provide maximum readiness and warfighting capability. Today we will hear from representatives of all the military services as well as the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Joining us are Mr. Lucian Niemeyer, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment; Lieutenant General Gwendolyn Bingham, Assistant Chief of Staff of the Army for Installation Management; Vice Admiral Dixon R. Smith, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Fleet Readiness and Logistics; Major General Vincent Colonese, Commander of Marine Corps Installation Command and Assistant Deputy Commandant, Installations and Logistics; and Major General Timothy S. Green, Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection, and Director of Civil Engineers. The subcommittee looks forward to your testimony. Before we turn to our witnesses, I'd like to recognize my colleague, the Senator from Hawaii, for his opening remarks. And also, this is the, as you know, there's been a reshuffling, and it really is a real honor to serve with Senator Schatz, and look forward to a very close relationship. Great thing about this committee is it's very bipartisan in the things that we attempt to get done. And again, we really do look forward to working not only with you, but even better, your staff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing to discuss the fiscal year 2019 military construction and family housing budget request. I also want to congratulate you on taking over this subcommittee. As a leader on the Veterans Affairs Committee and in the Senate Air Force Caucus, you are well aware of the challenges facing our veterans, along with our men and women in uniform. I also want to thank our outgoing chairman, Senator Moran, for his friendship and collaboration as we completed the 2018 Omnibus. That bill represented an important effort to move us in the right direction on military infrastructure, and because of his leadership, this subcommittee has made great strides in fulfilling the promises made to our veterans, and I'm looking forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to welcome the members of our panel and look forward to your testimony. General Green, this will be your last time testifying before the subcommittee, and we want to thank you for your more than 30 years of service and wish you well in retirement. For too long, we have put off properly investing in our military facilities. That has put the department and the services in a difficult position. They have had to sacrifice infrastructure and sustainment so that they can pay for other important investments like urgent non-infrastructure readiness requirements and new missions and operations. These hard choices have been made more difficult by nearly 2 decades of conflict, sequestration, and CRs. While there's been some relief from these fiscal pressures with the bipartisan budget agreement, MILCON has not seen the windfall other DoD accounts have under this budget deal. We must not continue to overlook our neglected facilities. This is where our service members live, train, and maintain vehicles and aircraft. This is the home base from which they deploy, and that means that failed or failing infrastructure weakens our ability to train, support, and ensure a high quality of life for our service members and their families. And with this in mind, the fiscal 19 budget request for MILCON and family housing represents a modest step forward. Total funding is up 4% over 18 enacted levels, including unfunded requirements added by Congress, and military family housing accounts are up 12% over the 18 enacted amount. But we need sustained and predictable funding moving forward. 1 or 2 years of investment will not dig us out of the hole that we are in that came about through years of neglect. We also need to make sure our MILCON investment, particularly overseas, reflects our national security strategy. Coming from Hawaii, I take a particular interest in the Asia-Pacific region, where our commitment to our partners remains absolute. And that's why I was surprised to see that this budget request is light on MILCON in the region. And so I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how this request came together. We also have to make good on our promise to our troops and their families on the home front and invest in projects to improve quality of life. This includes facilities for our Guard and Reserve, who have served as an operational reserve for nearly 2 decades and require parity with the active component. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Niemeyer, we welcome your testimony.
Thank you. I'd like to submit my written testimony for the record, and I have a brief oral statement. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, distinguished members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to talk to you today about the President's budget request for military installations, energy, and the environment. I also want to thank personally Senator Moran for his support for the military and our veterans over the years. Look forward to having that same support from Senator Bozeman, and really look forward to working with the committee as we address the needs of our military and their families who are called to sacrifice so much on behalf of our country every day. We are extremely grateful to Congress for the recently enacted Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which begins the recovery from the significant impact of sequestration. We have a responsibility now to honor the trust of the American people by spending each defense dollar wisely. In order to do so, our investments are now guided by the President's National Security Strategy and the Secretary of Defense's National Defense Strategy, recently released, with both clearly articulate the threats and challenges we face as a nation. Our mission is clear. We must be prepared to defend the homeland, remain the preeminent military power in the world, and advance an international order that promotes security and prosperity. The strategy confronts the stark reality that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. The strategy requires increased adaptive and dispersed basing. It also requires the Department to drive budget discipline and affordability in order to direct resources towards the highest unfunded warfighter requirements. Our budget priorities today support the strategy by establishing a foundation to rebuild the agility, resilience, readiness, and lethality of our armed forces. With a clear understanding of the strategy, we have set forth the following objectives to confront some of the challenges posed by years of underfunded accounts. First, we are eliminating waste in the management of installations, and we continue to advocate within the building for adequate funding to maintain our facilities. We're protecting installation and ranges from incompatible development around the country and improving the combat credibility of our test and training assets. We're enhancing our energy security. We are exploring new opportunities for third-party partnerships. We're working with the contracting community to develop smarter contracts and to manage contracts smartly. We continue to provide for the welfare of our people and resources through unparalleled environmental stewardship and occupational safety programs. And so importantly, we continue to collaborate with the hundreds of dedicated defense communities around the country who support our bases every day and provide for the quality of life for our troops and their families. These guiding principles will allow us to apply the resources in this budget request to achieve real results. The requested $11.4 billion for military construction and family housing programs makes significant progress in recapitalizing facilities. But this year's funding will not fully reverse the impacts of 6 years of sequestration. We currently have an unfunded maintenance backlog exceeding $116 billion. 23% of the department's facilities are in poor condition, and another 9% are failing based on recent analysis. My frank assessment is that it may be too costly to buy ourselves out of this backlog. We must work to remove unneeded capacity in order to fund higher priorities. As noted in the National Defense Strategy, we continue to reduce excess infrastructure and assess our installations. For instance, we must ensure facilities that are sized for 100% personnel actually have 100 personnel occupied or working in that facility. We also have proposed increased efforts to demolish unneeded facilities. We are reducing leases in order to remove folks back on base. Our work will get us part of the way, but we still need your support for a fair, objective, and transparent process for future base realignments and closures. These efforts will be enhanced by a careful evaluation of how and where we need to base new forces and new technologies. Bottom line, we must be able to transform from a Cold War basing strategy by realigning forces at the right locations to improve their readiness and lethality. We're also facing other challenges as well head-on within the department. We're managing the impact of increased costs of labor and materials resulting from adverse weather on our military construction projects. We are proactively improving MILCON project and contract management to deliver power projection projects on schedule and within budget. Given the cyber risks documented recently by the Department of Homeland Security, the department's energy programs are focused on power security for critical facilities. We appreciate this committee's support for the Energy Resiliency and Conservation Improvement Program to improve infrastructure security while still maintaining a payback for our projects. We are also urgently identifying resources to improve the cyber protection of our facility-related control systems. Our warfighters also need access to unencumbered land, water, and airspace to hone readiness and lethality without compromising health and safety. We are heavily engaged with other federal agencies to provide larger and more realistic air and land ranges with less maneuver restrictions to better simulate battlefield and threats around the world. Our commitment is to provide combat credible test and training capabilities. In all, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, we have both challenges and opportunities in support of our new National Defense Strategy. We have a determined sense of urgency to achieve results now, knowing each achievement deters aggression by our adversaries. We appreciate your continued support for our military and look forward to working with you on the committee to promote our nation's security.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Bingham.
Good morning. Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and members of this subcommittee. Thank you for your leadership, your advocacy, and your support of our men and women who are serving in harm's way in places all around the globe. The U.S. Army is focused on readiness and lethality to meet combatant commander and national defense strategy requirements. The FY 2018 MILCON appropriations reflects your support of Army installations, and we are very grateful for it. The Army's FY19 request for MILCON provides for ready and resilient installations. This will ensure our soldiers are properly trained and can be deployed anywhere in the world in order to fight and win our nation's wars. We must continue to reduce critical facilities deficits, recapitalize and modernize our infrastructure, and consolidate our installation footprint. The Army's family housing construction budget invests in the Army's most valuable asset, and that is our people. Quality housing and housing services provides homes for soldiers and their families living on our installations around the world. We continue to reduce resilience on external utility systems for our critical missions, improve energy and water efficiency, enable operational freedom of action, and contribute to mission readiness. The Army requests just over $2 billion in our FY19 MILCON budget. This begins to arrest facility degradation and improve installation readiness. We appreciate your continued advocacy of predictable, adequate, sustained, and timely funding for our installations to continue enabling warfighting readiness. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Vice Admiral Smith.
Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of the Navy's fiscal year 2019 military construction budget request. On behalf of the sailors and their families, thank you for you and your continued support of the Navy, its military construction program, and our 71 installations around the world which enable the Navy the nation needs. Thank you as well for the funding provided in both the fiscal year 18 omnibus appropriation and the hurricane amendment. The fiscal year 18 omnibus appropriation included critical Navy MILCON projects, such as the communications and crypto facility in Hawaii, which underpin the Department of Defense priorities to restore warfighting readiness and increase lethality. Further, the fiscal year 18 hurricane amendment is enabling us to repair or replace Navy facilities damaged or destroyed by hurricanes at installations in Florida, Georgia, Texas, and Puerto Rico. The Navy's fiscal year 19 MILCON budget request of approximately $2 billion for 33 projects is the largest in a decade. Coupled with an additional $2.1 billion in fiscal year 19 to sustain, restore, and modernize our facilities, the proposed investments are deliberately targeting to slow further degradation of our facilities and to begin reducing the existing $14.3 billion backlog of facilities maintenance and repair. While this request would achieve significant progress for the shore accounts, it is tempered by the reality that these problems were not created overnight, and the path to full readiness recovery will take a long-term commitment of resources, predictable funding, and time. The shore investments are inextricably linked to the Navy the nation needs to ensure we achieve a bigger, better, networked, talented, agile, and ready fleet. Indeed, CNO Richardson recently testified to the importance of the shipyards as a critical enabler, and as you know, the Navy recently released our Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Plan to recapitalize these critical facilities. This report to Congress outlines a $21 billion investment plan to improve dry docks, optimize our shipyards, and invest in capital equipment over 20 years. Approximately $18 billion of the total is just for infrastructure, and that equates to approximately $900 million per year. These projected funding levels far exceed Navy's historical investment in shipyards. In order to optimize our shipyards at a cost above and beyond our shore investment plan, the Navy will remain closely aligned with Congress to ensure our path to success. It is a privilege to testify before this committee today and share the details of our proposed fiscal year 19 investments. Congress is our critical partner to achieve the Navy the nation needs. As the Secretary and CNO testified Tuesday, we are committed to being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. We will invest smartly and will drive efficiency to ensure the best return on investment for the nation, our sailors, and civilians. Again, thank you for your support of the Navy's shore infrastructure programs, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Major General Colonese.
Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz. I'm sorry.
distinguished members of the
enough
committee,
voice,
on
you
behalf
don't
of the
really need
Commandant General Neller and thousands of Marines and sailors, civilians, and family members, we thank you for your continued support to the defense of the nation, the United States Marine Corps. Thanks to your support, your Marine Corps is on track to make significant improvements in the quality and condition of our installation infrastructure, which is fundamental to combat readiness and a generation of combat power. Our installations provide three critical force enablement functions. First, that are deployment platforms for which our expeditionary forces fight and win our nation's battles. Second, they're where our Marine Air Ground Task Force train and hone their combat skills. And third, they're home to our Marine sailors and families. As a commander, the single authority of the Marine Corps installation matters. The protection of our installations is my number one concern. There's a myriad of challenges in the current operating environment, and all signs indicate those challenges will compound and grow. The fact is our installations are vulnerable targets for growing hosts of sophisticated threats. The intent of disrupting and degrading our ability to generate combat power and to support our national defense. Our installations must prove resilient in the face of threats we face. We need to invest in the next generation of installation infrastructure to match the growing MAGTF capability. Your support is crucial as we begin to develop the installation infrastructure to support a next generation MAGTF. The Marine Corps Infrastructure Reset Strategy, which was signed by the Commandant, will improve the life cycle management and ensure the infrastructure investments are aligned with the Marine Corps capability-based requirements to support the warfighting mission and contribute directly to the current and future readiness. PB 19 funds the infrastructure reset with the realized long-term savings through a reduction over 1,056 failing structures, which will recoup 14 million square feet over the fit-up, which will yield a cost avoidance in facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts. Our infrastructure reset, if properly funded and executed, will set us on solid ground as we pivot and set conditions to fully enable our operating forces. No place to hide, no sanctuary, no boundaries. This is a new operating environment, and the implications of our installations are profound. Tomorrow's Marine Corps installation will look much different than in existence today. Our installations are power projection platforms that are only as lethal as those forces we project, whose training and readiness are key. We must also look to the modernization, how and where we train. We must advance our protection capabilities, and it's vital we increase the resiliency in the face of increasing threats. We are promoting an atmosphere of innovation and modernization by working with industry to incorporate the cutting-edge technologies across our installations. I look forward to working with you to sustain the warfighting capability and readiness of our power projection platforms and the quality of life of our Marine Corps. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Marines, sailors, families, and civilians. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Major General Green.
Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored today to represent America's Airmen and also to discuss the Air Force's fiscal year 2019 military construction and housing request. I want to start with a thank you for your personal support for the 5 FY18 F-35A bed-down projects at Allison Air Force Base that we requested as part of the last and final continuing resolution this year. Your support allowed us to, in fact, award these projects ahead of the summer construction season this year in Alaska, and you've kept the bed down on track, so thank you. I also want to say thanks for your support in giving the Air Force much-needed budgetary relief in FY18 and 19 through the bipartisan budget agreement. Your support enables the Air Force to meet the National Defense Strategy objectives. The Air Force's fiscal year 2019 budget request is rooted in the realities of our strategic environment and the reemergence of great power competition. As we prepared this budget request, the Air Force deliberately evaluated both today's needs and the capabilities demanded by anticipated future threats. The result is a budget aligned with the National Defense Strategy to restore readiness, drive innovation, and prepare the Air Force to win any fight at any time. Our 2019 budget request includes $1.78 billion in military construction requirements, prioritizing our efforts in three primary categories: the bed down of new weapon systems, combatant command urgent requirements, and recapitalizing our existing mission infrastructure. At the macro level, the Air Force infrastructure investment is approximately $887 million in support of the Air Force's modernization programs, including the bed down of the F-35A and KC-46A. We request $230 million for combatant commander urgent requirements, ensuring the United States is positioned to project power across the globe. This year's budget request also includes $377 million to recapitalize our most urgent existing mission infrastructure needs, including $225 million to maintain necessary research and development facilities to ensure we maintain a technological edge over our adversaries. Additionally, too often lost in our focus on readiness and lethality is the importance of the quality of life facilities on recruiting and retention as they support our airmen and their families. The FY19 budget request includes $395 million for quality of life funding for military housing construction and operations and maintenance. In total, our FY 2019 military construction request represents a strategic balance for capability and capacity, ensuring that we are best postured to field a ready force today while concurrently modernizing for the challenges of tomorrow. Chairman Boozman, Ranking Member Schatz, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Let me start out. Secretary Niemeyer, I was pleased to see your support for the Office of Economic Adjustment, OEA, in your prepared testimony. OEA's work is important to the state of Arkansas, and we are currently engaged with OEA on several joint land use studies for installations. I believe maintaining support for this office is crucial, and I'm glad that you view their work in collaboration with local communities as important and essential as I do. So again, thank you very much for your support. One thing I'd like for us to talk a little bit about that I think is so important. We struck this bipartisan agreement, budget agreement, additional $165 billion for defense. Really not a whole lot in MILCON. Can you talk about why that's the case? I mean, I know we've got all of these things going on. Readiness is a huge factor. We've got depleted munitions, and the list goes on and on. But truly, as we look forward, these are things. To me, what you get into with infrastructure is you can let things go, and it costs money. You can fix them; it's cheaper. You let them go long enough, and you actually have to replace it, which you're talking about huge costs. So, if you all would jump in, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir. Part of it was a timing issue. We normally prepare the budget for FY19. We start, pretty much throughout the entire year 2018. The initial guidance that was given to us within the services was a little lower. We leave it up to the services at OSD level to go ahead and determine within the guidance given how they want to allocate resources. But from my perspective, been doing this a long time, the numbers were not really provided to us in time for us to be able to make the adjustments to those particular investment accounts. It does take longer than usual to make adjustments in the MILCON accounts versus operations accounts or otherwise, and that's really has a lot to do with it. We already sent over the president's budget by the time we got the final budget agreement and ultimately the FY18 omnibus appropriations bill with the higher dollar amount.
Right, and you'd agree with my reasoning that as you let these things go, it just becomes more and more expensive, with time.
Yes, sir. We do our best within the building to make that clear to our leaders.
Does anybody else want to jump in with that or avoid it?
Mr. Chair, I would agree with you. I mean, and you addressed it. It's about a balance, and there are a lot of competing demands and interests going on right now, and so we've got to balance those. As I alluded to in my statement, it's $2 billion for the Navy this year. Is that enough? No, sir. Is that twice as much as what we've done historically? Yes. So we're starting to chip away at it. It took us a long time to get here. It's going to take us time to get out of it. But it's, Ranking Member Schatz and I talked about the other day, putting together the Shipyard plan. So we understand it's a challenge. We understand it's an issue. We're not going to fix it overnight, but we are aggressively attacking it, sir.
Let me ask you about something else that I think is really important. As you're aware, Congress and OMB have opposing views on incremental funding for MILCON projects. Congress prefers to incrementally fund large MILCON projects to ensure the maximum utility for each dollar appropriated in a given year. Incrementation frees up money that would otherwise not be executed until future years and allows DoD to fund critical unfunded priorities that can be executed in the budget year. OMB has directed that any incremental project not execute until all increments have been funded, unnecessarily delaying the project and defeating the purpose of incremental funding. Does DoD, tell us your opinion as best you can.
Thanks for that last caveat.
Well, tell us the pros and cons of that.
Yeah.
Again,
So,
I've laid out the pros.
Senator, that's a fantastic issue, and having been on a committee staff, I understand the desire to want to spend dollars prudently, and it is tough for a large military construction project to hold potentially hundreds of millions of dollars until we get a chance to expense that in the future. So I see both sides. Now that I'm in the Department of Defense, I understand that when when Congress makes a decision to unilaterally, incrementally fund a project to allow free up dollars for other priorities, it does create a budget nightmare for us as we have to then go find that allocation somewhere else in the subsequent year. So I think that's what OMB was trying to get at, was really trying to ensure budget accountability for each project we sent over is fully funded, while we also understand congressional concerns about, okay, we've got these unfunded priorities that come over, we need to fund those too, they're urgent as well. I can see both sides. I'm not sure the best way forward. I do believe a good policy would be to embrace that over a certain dollar amount, whether it be $100 million or whatever the dollar amount is, when we know we're not going to expense the majority of those dollars in the first couple of years, allow us the flexibility to bring to you a request that would provide only a partial appropriation but a full authorization. That, to me, probably having been around this for a long time, would be the best way to do that. But that's still a discussion needs to happen between us, between OMB and the committees.
Good. Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant General Bingham, can you just walk us through the sort of medium-term MILCON needs in Hawaii? I'm thinking Schofield, Wheeler, and PTA, and why they're important for readiness.
Yes, thank you, Senator Schatz. For sure, all of the facilities in the Pacific Theater are important to our lethality and our readiness, not only in Hawaii, but certainly in Korea as well. And so what we have taken upon is a investment plan for Hawaii's infrastructure revitalization. You and I talked about that a little bit. That includes operational facilities, maintenance facilities, Pahakaloa training area, to name a few. It will take a substantive amount of time, but we have put about $350 million wedge in the FIDIP beginning in FY20. And so that theater is vitally critical to our readiness around the globe, and specifically in that theater. So we are committed to its revitalization.
Thank you. Admiral Smith, you and I have been talking about Red Hill for a little while now. For the benefit of the members of the committee, can you just describe what Red Hill is and why it's so important for the Navy in the Pacific?
Yes, sir. So Red Hill is our strategic fuel reserve in Hawaii that we rely on significantly in the Pacific for any actions that we might have to take. It's up under a hill. You can't see it. It's gravity fed down, so if you lose power or anything else, it's got the ability to sustain the fleet. A couple of years ago, we discovered a leak in one of the tanks, which was from a repair that was happening. That's been fixed, but obviously it's a significant concern to the citizens of Hawaii and on the island of Oahu. It sits near an aquifer that provides the fresh water, and so we are working very closely with the state of Hawaii and the Water Board, Department of Health, and the Senator and his colleagues to make sure that we address this to conduct the appropriate repairs at an appropriate cost to ensure this doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Admiral Smith. This is a question for Lieutenant General Bingham and Major General Green. I want to talk about how MILCON dollars are allocated across components, and this gets a little technical, so you can correct me if I get something wrong, but my understanding is that the real property asset database is the way you determine the allocation between the active and reserve components as it relates to MILCON. And I'm not sure, it seems to me that that should be a factor, but not the only factor, especially given the sort of pace and the change in role that the different service branches have undertaken over the last 15 years, that if you're still looking at real property as the only way to determine future MILCON, you're not recognizing that between active and reserve, everything has changed over the last 15 years. So I guess the first question is, am I getting it right in terms of the way you make your allocations for future MILCON? And if I am, ought we to change that? I'll start with General Bingham.
Thank you, Ranking Member Schatz. Partially true. We use a MILCON process inside of the headquarters DA where we bring together all of the stakeholders. And that's a combination of our active component commands, our reserve, and our guard affiliated commands as well. And so what we look at is we look at our installation status report. We do, in fact, understand what the condition of our worst facilities are throughout our portfolio, but we rack and stack, if you will, what the needs are for each of the services. And we basically have a voting process where we have a ranking file.
So, and I'll move to General Green after I make this comment. It seems to me that if it's based on real property assets, that would make a lot of sense if it was an R&M schedule. But if you're talking about new construction, then what you already have in inventory is not the way you should determine what what else you're building. So I just want you to, consider whether this process reflects the current state of affairs. General Green with the final comment.
Yes, sir. I think it does reflect the current state of affairs as a starting point for discussion. But for example, when we're bedding down a new aircraft like a C-17 at a reserve base, that last year the reserves got more than what would be considered a fair share because we were bedding down a new mission. So we do accommodate the things I believe you're alluding to. Another challenge for us today is as we think about moving the overseas contingency funds into the base, those overseas facilities support all of our components, active, guard, and reserve. And so when we move it to the base, it's counted against the active duty side, and therefore you would need to also raise the reserve component. And in fact, those facilities support all of us.
Thank you.
Senator Hovind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today and for your service. I want to express my strong support for several projects in my state. One is a National Guard Readiness Center in Fargo, which is very much needed. We've had a very heavy deployment and ops tempo in our Guard in the War on Terror, and this is a facility that is very much needed. And then also for an upgrade to the helicopter facility at the Mounted Air Force Base, which actually serves the missile fields for the ICBMs. They're still flying Huey helicopters, if you can believe that were probably constructed in the 1960s. And they've kept them flying, and they're out there in all kind of weather, covering a huge area. We're talking about our MPs. And we need a new facility so that we can put the new helicopter Blackhawks in a facility that's large enough to house them. But it's amazing the workarounds these guys have made work, still flying those Huey helicopters. When I was governor, we started with Hueys and graduated to Blackhawks, and it's an iconic aircraft, but it's older than the people flying them. So that's a badly needed upgrade. Major General Green, along the lines of upgrades, Mounted Air Force Base, dual nuclear mission ICBMs, and B-52 with both conventional nuclear capability. The power lines that go to those ICBM missile fields were probably put in the 60s, I would guess. And as we work to upgrade the ICBMs, we're going to need to also upgrade those power lines. What arrangements are you making to do that?
Sir, as we look at the upgrade of the missile fields for the GBSD, as we plan the future requirement, all of those considerations are going to be a part of that bed down of the new missile system. So we're looking at it. There's not an immediate requirement today. They're performing adequately today, but we recognize that it's something we need to look forward to as we think about the next generation of missiles.
Okay. So you're working with local electric providers on that. They're informed, and you're determining exactly what is needed and when?
Yes, sir.
All right. In the FIDEP, you don't specify upgrades to mine its weapons storage area. And again, they have both conventional and nuclear weapons there. But there are other nuclear upgrades at some of the other facilities. So my question would be, when would Minot be in line for upgraded weapons storage?
Sir, as you know, we're going to redo all of the weapons storage facilities. Minot is outside of the FIDEP, so it is there in our overall program. And in fact, we've briefed committee staff members at some time, different times. So it's just residing outside of the FIDEP. It is because it's a dual use, the B-52s as well as the missile fields. It will be our final WSF, and it'll be the largest one.
Secretary Niemeyer, do we have adequate airspace and ranges to support unmanned flights and the ability to test various sensors that unmanned aircraft carry on board?
Sir, we have resources available for unmanned flight. I think the concern we have right now nationally, I know North Dakota is leading the change in FAA regulations. I know we're doing a lot of test activities up there. We do need nationally an updated FAA plan for unmanned systems. We do have some training concerns around the country that we have restricted airspaces in other places. I think that's probably the biggest concern we have right now as far as airspace for unmanned systems.
Right, and we have not only Guard flying them, we have Air Force flying them, and Customs and Border Protection flying them, and 900 miles of border responsibility that we use. So we certainly have the capacity there in Grand Forks and the interface with the technology park, Grand Skies, to do a lot of this sensor testing and so forth, airspace restrictions and so forth that we've worked to get. Restrictions isn't the right word, opportunities to fly unmanned. What are the biggest infrastructure challenges to increasing the number of unmanned flights as far as an aircraft in the unmanned inventory for DOD?
I would say making sure we've got a basing strategy in place. Right now, we've got a lot of our systems are flying overseas. We don't quite have plans in place that when they do come home, hopefully peace will break out around the world at some point. We can bring them back to the United States. I think we still have work to do around the country where best to place those and what locations would best support their continued training and development to next generation of capabilities for that system.
Well, and that's key, isn't it? Because we've got to be able to fly them in the NAS for your training and development, not only the aircraft themselves, but sensors. And so now you're talking about either restricted airspace or concurrent airspace use. And ultimately, we've got to get to concurrent airspace use.
Sir.
And so that's something that we can work with you to develop and are working to develop. Any other thoughts you have in terms of how we build that?
Yeah, I would love to have the opportunity. I hate to put another shameless plug in, but I'd love to be able to take a look at the entire enterprise for unmanned systems through a process where I could pick those locations that are most ideally suited for us to be able to support those systems long term. Right now, for us, that base realignment and closure process allows that enterprise look. It's at emerging technologies like that and where best to place them.
Are you looking at it without that type of, in other words, are you actively doing that without a BRAC process?
The services are doing the best they can. As you know, the Air Force has a basing process to try to identify locations. I do believe there's some encumbrances to that particular process that could be solved by taking a more wide and more comprehensive enterprise look.
Okay. Thank you. Again, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it.
Senator Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Senator Schatz. And really appreciate all of you being here today with us. General Green, I'd like to start by having a conversation about the new Space Rapid Capabilities Office at Kirtland Air Force Base. The new Space RCO is supposed to play an important role in the Air Force's attempt to leverage public-private partnerships and reduce the time to launch national security assets into space. While Space RCO is just starting to get off the ground, I believe that it will need funding for new military construction in order to truly scale up and meet the Air Force's needs. For example, there is a lack of building space adjacent to Kirtland AFRL for companies to utilize. There is also a need for secure compartmentalized information space, both for the space RCO and private companies to utilize in support of the Air Force in Albuquerque. And I'm sure there are many other needs. Will you make it a priority to stand up the space RCO quickly and expedite the military construction priorities in order to meet the Secretary of the Air Force's goals for space launches?
Yes, sir, we will. As you likely know, we've already identified facilities today as the initial short-term facility options, and we'll be studying all of the things that you described for the way ahead. Yes, sir.
Great. Do you agree that ensuring access to space is a national security priority and that a successful space RCO will be a key component of this effort?
Yes, sir, I do.
Great. And I look
More importantly, the Secretary of the Air Force does.
You know, that's important too. And I also look forward to working with you and the Secretary on this. General Bingham, great to see you again. You announced last year in this committee that White Sands Missile Range, after a long drought of military construction, would be moving forward with the information systems facility included in this year's budget. The project was originally slated for 2023, but the needs for better data management made this project a major priority for the Army and for DOD. General Bingham, how will this new facility improve White Sands Missile Range ability to manage and acquire data for testing?
Thank you, Senator Udall, and great to see you again as well. As you know, having been stationed out at White Sands for about 21 months, I had really come to appreciate that it's an absolute national treasure there. We will be making good use of this new information systems facility. It will actually displace seven separate facilities, so that will make it more efficiently use of information management and its communications capability there on the range. So I know it will be quite an asset for the men and women who will use it.
Appreciate that answer. And do you believe that the new facility could enable White Sands to be a more efficient user of the airspace?
Absolutely.
Mr. Niemeyer, you know New Mexico well. New Mexico has proudly supported its military bases, and I believe the President's military construction budget does a good job supporting the troops who work and train in New Mexico. The budget in New Mexico is also critical to address some of the training shortfalls for pilots. And then this question is for Mr. Niemeyer, General Bingham, and General Green. The pilot shortage is a very serious issue. I think many of you have talked about that before. In New Mexico, the Department of Defense and all the military branches who utilize WSMR need to work together to improve this situation. The F-16 training pipeline through Holloman Air Force Base is one important component to address the pilot shortage. And for years now, I've pressed all stakeholders to work with White Sands to do a better job about deconflicting airspace with Holloman in order to ensure access for Holloman's pilots. In my opinion, the Air Force should move quickly to make the F-16 basing permanent at Holloman. Moving to another base will likely cost additional money for MILCON and will sap the time from the airmen working to alleviate the pilot shortage. Do you agree that the Air Force needs to do everything it can to improve opportunities for training and should work to prevent unneeded future MILCON spending? Mr. Niemeyer, why don't we start with you?
I'll talk more to what I see is what happening in New Mexico happens around the country where you have a friendly competition between test requirements and training requirements. WSMR has a long history of trying to balance that. As we manage a very important part of our national airspace and training and test infrastructure, the WSMR, my job is to work with both services to making sure that we can support the test requirements, which there's no other test range like this in the world, what we have at WSMR, along with what is a very, very desirable piece of airspace for training. We work every day to try to balance that within the Department of Defense. I'll leave it up to the services to talk specifically about the F-16.
Yeah, just brief answers. I'm out of time, but
Yep.
General Bingham and General Green.
Certainly, we want to work with our Air Force comrades and do on a repeated basis out at White Sands to do, as Secretary Niemeyer mentioned, to deconflict that airspace out there, and I think we've got a good system to do that.
Great. Thank you, General Green.
just fine.
Yes, sir. We agree about the partnership with regard to the airspace, and certainly as we go through the basing process, we'll announce the Secretary will announce some candidates this year, and we agree with the need to minimize MILCON.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me first commend and congratulate you on your assumption of the chairmanship of this
Well,
committee.
we've got big shoes to fill, but we're going to do our best.
I knew you'd say that's why I complimented you. And let me also thank the staff. Patrick and his crew have been great to work with, and I'm very appreciative of their help. And I look forward to being a valuable and active member of this subcommittee. And I appreciate Mr. Schatz, Senator Schatz's comments. And I was trying to think if you're my favorite ranking member, but then I have two others that I would offend. None of them, don't point at Tester, none of them are Tester. Let me start with Fort Leavenworth, the 35th ID Readiness Center. Secretary Niemeyer, I appreciate the chance I've had to work with you and the services that you attempt to work with and coordinate, and I thank you for that relationship. Let me ask you and General Bingham, our committee provided in FY 2017 $31.9 million for a new Readiness Center at Fort Leavenworth. Only this last February has the National Guard Bureau released a request for proposal to award a contract for construction. I'm not here to analyze why that's the case. I just would like to know if you and General Bingham would commit to me to doing everything you can to see that this we make up for the lost time and that this project proceeds to its rapid completion.
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you. General?
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity through our Army National Guard Master Transformation Plan for Readiness Centers. We are definitely very much wanting to improve the readiness of all of those facilities. And currently, we are using sustainment dollars as well as R&M dollars and MILCON dollars to do that.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me now talk about Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant. Not a conversation that we've not had previously. This begins in 2005 when the Army conveyed Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant, which is over 9,000 acres of land in Johnson County, Kansas, the suburbs of Kansas City on the Kansas side, to Sunflower Redevelopment. This has drug on a very long time. 10 years of back and forth on remediation of the land. I convened a meeting in 2015 with the Army and brought officials to Sunflower, trying to get everyone on the same page. Of course, commitment was made to me and to the people in the room. 3 years later, I view the disconnect continues. FY18 MILCON construction has report language, bill language that directs the Army to conduct an assessment to ensure that the redevelopment priorities are synchronized with the developer and the Army. I don't know that the situation today is any better, and it doesn't seem like anybody is taking charge. It's so slow. The project managers are running out of funds, and the work stops. It's a waste of time and money. The Army apparently will be at Sunflower for another decade, cleaning up the site. It's just such a long haul, and I would ask you, General Bingham, I'd like to request that you visit with me Sunflower and get a picture for what I'm talking about. And then I would ask you to follow up with me that you could tell me the facts about what the total expenditure on remediation by the Army has, what's been completed and at what cost. And I need to also highlight for you the specific need for removal of concrete on the site. So first of all, I want to highlight the concrete. Second, would like you to agree to come with me and see the facility, see the location. And thirdly, if you could tell me at some point in the near future the amount of money spent on remediation, where we are in the process, and how you see it being brought to a conclusion.
Thank you, Senator Moran. I appreciate that question. I just do want to assure you, though, that the Army is committed to fulfilling our obligation to clean up Sunflower. In point of fact, we are in a three-phased operation. As you mentioned, it has taken a long time. We're currently in phase one that began in earnest about 4 years ago, which is deals with our planning and documentation. Our second phase, after we complete this, hopefully next year, we'll move into the execution phase and be able to see that remediation through to completion. But yes, I'd be honored to accompany you to visit that site, and we'll schedule that with your planner.
Thank you for your response. Secretary, you instructed me, probably in your words, you suggested to me that I have a conversation on this topic with the Secretary of Army. That has happened. And he indicated an unawareness of the issue and indicated a willingness to become more aware. I would ask you if you have any other suggestions of how I can better address this issue in trying to get the Army to move more rapidly.
As you were discussing with General Bingham, I made a note to myself to see, I know General Bingham's the last thing she wants to hear where OSD staff can assist. I'm not sure how much cerebral we can provide, but I made a note to myself to making sure that my staff, my expertise that I have on my staff, can be available to General Bingham and yourself.
Assuming that's fine with General Bingham, I'm pleased with that because you have an expertise and a background in this arena, and I would welcome your help. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would concur with you, at least your line of questioning is about incremental financing. We've got to get to the point, in my view, in which we can begin funding, even though we don't have all funding, and I would encourage the Secretary's office and the departments to pursue that with this administration. Thank you.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all for being here. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, congratulations on the new subcommittee.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to miss you dearly.
I'm going to miss you too. You are my favorite chairman, I'm proud to say. But thank you very, very much.
As you talk about your Milcon project.
Exactly right. General Green, thank you all for being here. I understand that you're going to, my crack staff tells me you're going to hang up your cleats here at some moment in time in this year. I want to say thank you for your service, and I have looked forward to working with you, and we look forward to working with the person who is going to take your place. I want to talk about the ICBMs a little bit. It's what happens when you have Hoeven and Tester on the same Appropriations Committee. I want to talk about the weapons storage facility and those projects. F.E. Warren is and Malmstrom is moving forward, although because of potentially some issues that have come up at F.E. Warren, we have slid from 19 to 20, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. You can correct me on that. Could you give me a brief update, a very brief update on what's going on with F.E. Warren, and if it is going ahead of where it was initially scheduled, or are we behind? Do we have a potential to slide another year, or could we potentially even pick up a year and start this project towards the end of 19?
Yes, sir. So we've got one more request for reauthorization to come over and the appropriation addition for the F.E. Warren. We've worked with your staff about that, and that should put it on track. Where we've been, importantly, is the Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, the Commander of Air Force Material Command, convened a working group, and they went very deliberately through each and every requirement of the facilities. And I won't go through all the details, but what we came out with in the end is really the validation of many of the requirements from security, operational, and safety. Those were the three big rocks. So I think we have a good definition of what we need in the future. We've made the adjustments that we can within the F.E. Warren, and we're ready to move forward, and we're confident that we can continue to learn.
Have you started construction on Warren yet?
No, sir. We have not awarded the contract.
But you anticipate that now that contract will start on time and end on time, and we'll get to Malmstrom Air Force on time?
Yes, sir. I'm confident we'll get to Malmstrom Air Force on time.
Okay, which is 2020.
Yes, sir.
Secretary Niemeyer, look, there are regional threats and emerging global threats that quite frankly, all over the world. We have had a tendency, and I still think we do, to disproportionately foot the bill in both manpower and equipment. We're talking about equipment here today. I think it is our obligation as a leader of the free world to do our fair share, and maybe even a little more. But the question is that time and time again, I think we've put ourselves on the line, taxpayer dollars, American lives. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Meanwhile, our allies are freed up to spend a lot of those dollars that they maybe should be spending on some of the stuff we're spending on education and infrastructure and research and development and all the things we need to spend money on too. So the question is, in terms of the overseas MILCON, does this budget exacerbate our allies' over-reliance on the U.S. military to provide their security? And could you tell me why or why it doesn't do that?
So we've spent a lot of time in the last year, Secretary of Defense has, working with NATO allies to ensure that we do have some concerns with the size of the military, the spending by our allies. We continue to make those points that we do need to see a greater commitment on the part of our NATO allies, particularly in providing for their defense as well as a common defense of NATO. We do have still requirements that we are asking for your support for within the Overseas Contingency Construction Account for select projects that we believe are needed to help us with allies which are increasing their support for us. And in countries we haven't traditionally invested in. We do believe those are prudent investments to provide the Secretary of Defense his goal within the National Defense Strategy to provide for more adaptive and dispersed basing opportunities to allow us to be able to work with a greater number of allies in Europe, specifically as we try to deter Russian aggression.
So to put it very bluntly then, do you believe that this budget is a fair balance between what we're spending and what our allies are spending as far as the threats that are occurring around the world?
I have not made personally the determination whether it's fair. I do know why we are asking for the funds and why they are in concert with the National Defense Strategy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me add my congratulations to you as you take over the chairmanship of this important subcommittee. And I can assure you that at this particular hearing, that you and the ranking member are the favorites of all of us here on the panel, both before us and the panel of your colleagues. But it is great to have you here. Admiral Smith, as you know, Maine is the proud home of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery. And I'm very pleased that the Navy and the Defense Logistics Agency have requested $162 million in total for much-needed improvements at the shipyard this year. These projects will help ensure that the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard can effectively dock both Los Angeles-class and Virginia-class submarines to conduct their maintenance, support the requirements to execute the Los Angeles-class service life extensions in the years to come, and expand an outdated warehouse facility that will help the shipyard receive, inspect, and distribute submarine components for worldwide fleet support. These modernization and infrastructure investments are desperately needed. They've been needed for a long time to help the shipyard conduct the availabilities necessary to improve and maintain fleet readiness. So it's very much a step in the right direction. I'm particularly supportive of the more mature dry dock revitalization portion of the Navy's overall shipyard modernization plan. That will restore 67 of the 68 deferred maintenance availabilities over 20 years. So that's a great return on investment for the Navy. My one question for you, and I am getting to a question, is that the modernization plan was completed before there was the additional funding. And in light of the fact that the size of the fleet is likely to be larger than the plan's initial assumptions, are you taking another look at the adequacy of the current modernization plan?
Senator, yes, that shipyard is great. I've had a chance to visit it several times, and it's great to be able to see that we're putting the resources into it that we need to put into not only that shipyard, but all 4 shipyards. Yes, you're correct. The shipyard optimization plan came out before we identified where we need to grow to, 355. So we are relooking that with a growth of the fleet. what's in the plan right now, what meets the future requirement, what doesn't meet the future requirement, what's that delta, what has to be added or changed to do that. So that analysis is going on, being led by Naval Sea Systems Command right now, ma'am.
I'm very glad to hear that. The other issue I want to follow up on, Senator Moran raised, and that has to do with incremental funding. One of the projects for the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard this fiscal year is to build a super flood basin at Dry Dock Number 1, and the long-term goal is to make it fully capable of docking the Virginia-class submarines. And eventually, this is going to require building a partition within the superflood basin, which the Navy is planning to fund in fiscal year 2021. So I understand the cost of the project is what has caused the Navy to split the project into two phased projects over fiscal year 2021 and 2022. But my concern is that a phased approach could introduce unacceptable risks to the tight schedule required to make sure that the project is complete when the Navy needs it for fleet maintenance beginning in January of 2024. So rather than splitting the project, which significantly increases the risk to the scheduled completion date, would the Navy consider two options? One, either fully funding it in a single fiscal year as a single project rather than a two-phase project, or if that isn't feasible, providing incremental funding at 65% in fiscal year 21 and then 35% in fiscal year 22.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So, as you state, this is going to be an expensive project, but it's much needed. We have not built a dry dock in 30 years, so we're going through the engineering analysis right now to figure out how to properly do this. That engineering analysis will help us determine what is the best way to fund that to make sure we get that done when it's needed.
Great. If I would ask that you keep us informed as that engineering study progresses.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Thank you, and thank you all for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Admiral Smith, good to see you again. I wanted to stay on the topic that Senator Collins raised and ask the flip side of it, coming from the perspective of a state with a private shipyard. I'm very supportive of the efforts to try to make up for this deferred maintenance at our public shipyards, but as we know, that's a long-term project, and even if you stay on schedule, the Navy has projected that there's going to be a large percentage of maintenance work that just simply won't be able to be done at the public shipyards, and thus it brings me to my question. As you know, we've got this workload valley in Connecticut at Electric Boat as we seek to ramp up to the point at which we're going to be producing at many times 2 submarines in that yard at any one given time. And we are very worried about the likelihood of losing some really important skilled workforce during that period of valley. And so we've talked previously about maintenance projects like the Boise, and I'm glad that that contract got awarded to the wrong shipyard, but Virginia does decent work as well. Question is just this: wouldn't it be wise to fill this private yard workforce valley now with some backlog maintenance to make sure that that trained workforce is there when we have that ramp up as the Columbia starts to come into view?
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and sir, it's good to see you again. And yet, obviously, the readiness of our fleet is number one priority, and also the skill and the talent of our nuclear repair force in both our public yards and our private yards. I know that the Navy is looking now at how, we look at how to properly balance across our public yards, and I know we're looking to how to potentially use the private yards. And if I may, I'd like to take the remainder of that question for the record and get back to you with more detail.
Be happy to do that. My second question is still focused on Groton and New London, and I'll bring in Secretary Niemeyer for this one. This is a really good study that was done by the Navy regarding the housing situation in southeastern Connecticut. And so wanted to just get your thoughts on how the Navy and the Department of Defense can continue to work with us in southeastern Connecticut to solve what is going to, not be a crisis, but a challenge moving forward. Because as you're aware, the Navy's going to start production on Columbia in 2021. It's considering adding a third Virginia class. And so you're going to have 2 boats under construction, and each boat is going to have a pre-commissioning crew of about 250. Thus, conservatively, we're talking about an additional 500 families, not to mention all the junior sailors that are coming in. At the same time, the DB is ramping up production, so you're requiring more and more workforce housing. So this report is a good start. But I wanted to ask you about, plans to do a broader analysis of the impacts expected over the next few decades on southeastern Connecticut, and wanted to ask for your commitment to work with us to try to come up with some really good plans to make sure that we have adequate housing for all of the Navy personnel that are going to be on site. I understand, your book is not to make sure the DB has private sector housing, but their ramp up is going to affect the availability of affordable housing for Navy personnel as well.
Yes, Senator, thank you. Well, given that my nephew works at EB, I'm also interested. Yeah, but no, you have my commitment. I was actually on the phone yesterday with the executive officer for the base talking just about housing. So, yes, you have our commitment as we move forward to make sure that we're working together to make sure we can help solve what is potentially a housing challenge here in the future.
Secretary Niemeyer.
Yep. And so what we also have at the OSD level, we have the Office of Economic Adjustment that allows us to work with communities and states to look at, collectively, what does an increase in DoD activity, potentially what can we do to mitigate the impacts, to work with the community to see what improvements can be made, and look forward to using that office to work with you on assessing what potentially can be done in Southeast Connecticut.
We're ready. As you know, the state has made unprecedented investments in the sub-base, and we're going to do whatever is necessary to make sure that we have what our Navy workforce and our private sector workforce needs. But doing that in coordination with both of you and others is helpful. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee.
One thing, Senator Murphy, I do appreciate the opportunity to testify before the next generation. My 17-year-old son would be asleep by now, so it's a testament.
I'm gonna ask him how I did when I'm done here. So, thanks, guys.
Senator from Alaska, Ms. Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you. I think you and your ranking member will learn that when my priorities come up, they always start with an A, and it's not Arkansas, no offense, but it's Arctic. And my friend from Hawaii, I think, has learned that this big Pacific Ocean has warm spots and colder spots, but from the defense perspective, it is clearly an area of interest. So I want to start my questions directed to you, Secretary Niemeyer, and this relates to our Arctic strategy. Last May, Deputy Secretary of Defense Work spoke about the Arctic not being a central concern in the 2014 National Defense Strategy. We now have the newly published 2018 National Defense Strategy Summary. It also does not specifically highlight the Arctic region nor address the Arctic infrastructure. So I'd like it if you can provide me just a brief update on the Department of Defense's vision for posture and infrastructure in the Arctic region. And I'll ask specifically, when I'm talking about infrastructure, it's more than just installation. I think it was just a couple days ago, I read an article about Russia's plans to lay trans-Arctic fiber cable that will link the military installations starting in western Russia, bordering Norway, across the Arctic to the Pacific. And supposedly it's going to allow them real-time monitoring of the operational situation in the Arctic. As you know, we're pretty limited in the U.S. Arctic when it comes to infrastructure in general. We're making some good developments with fiber, but should we be prioritizing linking our installations with high-speed fiber. So we don't have too much time to talk about it, but if you can give me your views, that would be appreciated.
Yes, ma'am. I'll keep it short and sweet. The questions about an Arctic policy, that's a little bit beyond my capability to represent the DoD position. I'm the installations and energy guy. I will say that from our perspective, with our world, Alaska is the center of the known universe right now. We have
music to my ears.
we have a missile field we're putting in, the 4th missile field at Greeley. We have a $1 billion long-range discrimination radar that we're getting installed. We have a backup power supply in this year's budget to go ahead and support that. Eielson's getting 2 F-35 squadrons. I'm actually going up to Alaska in June, specifically because I want to make sure that these projects are on track. They're absolutely critical to our nation's defense. So I can't really attest to the fact that I do know that the National Defense Strategy says that our homeland is no longer a sanctuary. Alaska is part of our homeland. I do know that it's very high in my part, at least, to making sure that we are delivering capabilities within the state of Alaska. We're also working on innovative potential power solutions to include what we can do for more dedicated power sources for our critical assets there. We've been studying that area for small modular reactors for years. We do believe that there's a potential for us to be able to take advantage of the emerging technologies there. So Alaska is always in our thoughts as far as what we're working day to day within my portfolio.
Well, I'd like further conversation about just that broader view, because I think we recognize that we can put in that hard infrastructure, but you also have to have the reliable power in a cold place. And so the exploration into this idea of what we might be able to do with SMRs or the micro reactors, but also from the broadband capacity perspective, you need to have reliability as well. And so these are key strategic investments that we'd like to have further focus and conversation. General Green, thank you for noting what we were able to do in the CR, making sure that the approaching arrival of the F-35s, that is going to be staying on time, on track. We are very keen in our focus on, as you say, Secretary Niemeyer, making sure that that moves forward without complications. Two things. We've heard that with the prospect for steel tariffs, that this might impact the cost of the projects related to the bed down. Do you expect any reprogramming that will be necessary within the budget or having to involve us in that aspect of it?
Ma'am, we're watching that closely along with our friends, and we have not seen an indication yet that that's going to be required.
Good. Appreciate that. And then with respect to the bed down itself, I continue to hear concerns from folks in the community up there, the builders particularly, that the risk of constructing off-base housing is higher without the assurances from the Air Force that you're not going to move forward with new privatized housing on base that would then compete with the off-base construction. So this is something that I may raise again with the Secretary when she comes before the Defense Subcommittee, but I hope that you could convey my interest in providing the community builders the assurances that they're hoping for. It seems that the discussions are a little bit better right now. I'm going to be up there next Friday for our annual salute to the military. That again gives me an opportunity to be intersecting with not only the folks on the civilian side, but our military in these discussions. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be in a good place, but any assurances that you can give the community about the Air Force intent on the housing side, I think is greatly appreciated.
Yes, ma'am. We have not begun any discussions about increasing housing privatization there, to my knowledge. So I will go back and ask the question again, but I'm not sure where this keeps coming from.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I have two more quick questions that I'd just like to raise for their awareness, and we can do follow-up. One is Galena forward operating location, and this again is for you, General Green. A few weeks ago, I was up in Galena, which hosted the former Galena forward operating location. It has the Air Force has some site restoration obligations. The RAB was out there just after my visit, so I'm hoping that we can get some kind of a brief on what came from those conversations, just so I can understand where the Air Force and the community are coming from and if we're all on the same page.
Yes, ma'am. We can get you a brief on that, and we certainly work hard to stay aligned with the community.
I appreciate that, and I know that they do as well. And then final question, General Bingham, this is related to the Fort Greely School. You may be familiar with it, but this is something that is an issue that just seems to defy resolution. The rural school district inherited the building, which was constructed by the federal government to educate the kids there at Fort Greely. The district can't afford to maintain the school. They've moved out. The Army's proposed to send the school district the bill for demolishing the building. The school district can't afford it. They can't deal with the disposal of the asbestos. So we've been in extensive discussions with the Army. They just haven't gone anywhere. But I don't see where it's in anyone's best interest to put these small rural school districts in financial peril. So I'm just hoping that we're going to be able to come to a more amicable solution, and look forward to working with your teams on this.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. And I remember last year when you asked me that question, I remember saying that we wanted to be good neighbors. We wholeheartedly, too, appreciate the school district educating our children there at Fort Greely. And so to that end, we've done a couple of things, though, since we last talked about this. We've working with the school district at the request of the garrison to extend the lease to provide us additional time to help work through an amicable solution. We in the Army have offered to defray costs associated with the landfill there. And I'm wondering, though, if we might continue to work with you and your team to help perhaps look at a legislative solution for local educational agencies for this type of unique situation.
We are happy to explore solutions that will work for the community, for the school district, and for Army. So
thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise next round I will not go over my allotted time by 4 minutes. Thank you.
That's fine, and we appreciate your leadership on the Arctic in the Homeland Security Subcommittee. We were able to, with your leadership, to push forward the icebreakers, and hopefully we can get some.
Oh, so appreciative.
Well, it's so very needed, and again, we appreciate your leadership on it.
Thank you
very much. I've just got a couple more things real quick, and I think Senator Schatz does also. Major General Green, let me ask you a question concerning Little Rock Air Force Base, which certainly, you know, is important to the state of Arkansas, but it's also very important to the state, not only the state, but to the country because of its mission. As you know, we've had a airport runway situation going on since 2014 that you know, got into the middle of it, and it wasn't going well. And essentially now we're in a situation where we're almost starting over again. I think the contract will be awarded for redesign in September, environmental assessment. A couple things. We've been frustrated with it, you know, with the movement of the project, again, since 2014. So let us help you. If you run into environmental issues as far as the, you know, anything that has to do with assessments, redoing those, let us help you with those. You know, hopefully there's not going to be a bunch of that. The other thing that we'd like is at some point fairly soon to know what we anticipate the cost, and then also how it's going to be paid for. I mean, that's, you know, those are fairly basic things. So again, like I say, if you'll just commit to kind of shepherding that and you know, making sure that we stay on track and do the things we need to do, we would greatly appreciate that.
Yes, sir, that's an easy commitment to make. We are all paying a great deal of attention to that runway. It's been on my radar since I was at Air Mobility Command back in 2011. We've been watching this, so it's of great importance to the nation as well as to Little Rock Air Force Base.
Good. Thank you very much. And we do appreciate your service, and you are going to be missed. That's a great compliment coming from a an old University of Arkansas Razorback fan to a Texas A&M Aggie.
Yes, sir. I realize that.
But like I say, thank you so much for your service and all you represent. The other thing is I'd like to ask about, hold on. Accountability. And, you know, you mentioned Vice Admiral Smith, you know, you certainly hadn't got the money that you'd like, but you got twice as much as you've had. When we look at the projects that are going out, we've got all of these projects that are exceeding $100 million, big projects. We've got the increase in the economy with the market fluctuating that way, which makes a huge difference as you go forward with these projects. So I guess my question is, you know, what are you doing? What tools do we need to give you, if we need to give you some more, in regarding maximizing the ability to get the best prices? How do we hold our contractors accountable? You know, those kind of situations. So again, if you'd like to jump in, we can start with you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, the Little Rock runway is a perfect case where we probably should have done a better job overall. I think just some frustration there, even at my level, about how that project was carried out, on why we didn't do a better job working with the requirements, working with the program manager, making sure we had a contractor on board who could do the work. But that's endemic of some of the concerns we have right now in some of our execution across the board. We do have a commitment to the Secretary of Defense to deliver military construction projects on time and under target. That's probably the best thing we can do. Your continued oversight on that is good. I'm not sure we need any additional authorities right now or flexibility. I think we just need to be able to do a better job of working with our construction agents, making sure our requirements match what we ultimately build, and then we're working with the contracting community to resolve any concerns there. My concern here is right now we have contracting officers in some cases who are running projects versus the program managers, the engineers, and we've got to get a handle on that. We've talked to the committee about this before. You've put some good language in the past to help us there. Continuing with some oversight there, I think would be very beneficial for us. So we have to come in and explain ourselves. I think ultimately it's good for the American people and making sure we're spending dollars prudently.
No, we appreciate that, and certainly, you know, anything we can do, language-wise or whatever, to be helpful would be. Vice Admiral Smith, like I say, you've got additional funds to go around. What are some of the things that better forecasting? You know, how do we prevent overruns and things like that?
So in the pressurized environment, we've been shortchanging ourselves in planning and design and not been putting enough money into that. So part of this is we've increased up to 8%, from 5% to 8% of the project now for planning and design. So we're going to do a better job up front. The other thing we've done, we stole it from the acquisition community. We weren't doing this on the construction side, is as the planning is going on, both Navy Installations Command and Navy Facilities Command are going to do gate reviews. So as the project goes forwards and develops, the commanders and their teams at both those organizations are going to review the projects to make sure that they're progressing properly so we don't find surprises on the backside, which is where we have not been very good in the past.
Very good. Anybody else? Evidently not. Senator Schatz.
Thank you. Let's start with Mr. Niemeyer. Can we expect a fiscal year 2019 budget amendment with MILCON request to reflect the current budget agreement?
I'll have to go check with the comptroller. I don't know if we have any particular budget amendments in place right now or plans for those.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about energy. I know the department is investing in energy resiliency sort of on base in installations. I'm wondering what the thinking is outside of the fence line, especially to the extent that bases or installations are, you know, in the United States or in on the commercial grid. It seems to me we have to worry about outside of the fence line too. So what's your thinking along those lines?
Yes, sir. Completely agree. First of all, we're really proud of what's going on in Hawaii right now, working with HECO and collaboratively working together to address energy security.
I was hoping you would say that.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up being a fantastic example of how we can work together with local utility to address the concerns in Hawaii and Oahu, in addition to providing the energy security that we need to power our critical missions up there. So, on the larger scale, you did hit upon a fantastic point. We do have specific requirements for the country where we only allow for MILCON inside the fence line. There might be a need for a transmission line, maybe 2 or 3 miles to get us to a substation that might give us a significant amount of redundant capability. Right now, our ability to do that is limited.
By statute.
By statute. And correctly so. I think we need to come back to Congress to explain why we want to do this. There's a program called...
but sort of a limited waiver authority. You know, this isn't going to be dozens of requests. It's going to be only in those instances where it's technically necessary.
What I like, we have a similar program for transportation improvements where we need to build a road off base. We go through the defense access roads. We come to you with the military construction request. Once you appropriate funds, then we transfer those funds over to the local Department of Transportation. I would love to have a similar authority where we could then come to you. You all can authorize it, appropriate it, and then we can then work with the utility. Okay, we need that last bit of line or that last bit of a substation that's off an installation that gives us energy security.
And the vote is coming up, so I'll take the next two for the record. And the first question is for Mr. Niemeyer and Major General Colonese. You know, I continue to worry about the plan to relocate Marines to Guam. I think that it is fraught with technical, political, logistical, funding challenges, and I think we've had stars in our eyes about how easy this was going to be for the last, you know, as long as it's been the plan. It's been a relatively speaking unrealistic plan. Now, I think we're getting closer to being able to execute. I understand that, but there are still pretty big challenges on the planned training ranges of CNMI, and my question specifically is, do you have contingency plans if Tinian and Pagan can't be built? You know, how do we maintain our ability to train if NEPA or local politics or logistics or contractor availability or whatever it may be cause us to have to move the timeline to the right? So that's one for the record. And then finally, I just wanted to echo the chairman's enthusiasm for the Office of Economic Adjustment, and I'll offer a question for the record, but I know that there's been discussion sort of at both sides of this dais around the Office of Economic Adjustment, but from the policymaker's perspective, I think it's at least pretty nearly unanimous.
Thank you for the support for that office.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and I think we had a really good hearing. I know you all are busy, you got lots to do, but it's so important to come over and tell us what's going on, and also for us to figure out how we can help you. That's really what it's all about, is trying to make the the branches that you all represent as efficient as possible, and making the life of the men and women that serve in uniform, as easy as we can also, in the sense of that commitment. So, again, we appreciate very, very much. For members of the subcommittee, any questions for the record should be turned in to the subcommittee staff no later than Friday